Greetings again and welcome to Ghost Stories of Washington. Hopefully you're having a good start to your day. Ghost Stories of Washington, Chapter 4, Stage Fright, Part 1, which includes two stories, Phantom Feminists and Ghosts on Guard. Actors and the crews that support their theatrical efforts tend to be a devoted, dedicated, and emotional group of individuals. They're also highly superstitious, but that's another equally interesting story. The actor's job is an odd one. In a highly contrived setting, with the help of the others, he or she works to convince another group of individuals, the audience, that something fictional is actually fact. Judging by the number of haunted theaters, this kind of highly charged atmosphere is a successful breeding ground for phantoms. So, Phantom Feminists. At the Harvard Exit Theater in Seattle, patrons are not so much movie house customers as they are guests to an unusual, luxurious home, tucked away on the East Roy Street in the Capitol Hill region. The stately appearance of the three-story red brick 1920s era building belies its purpose. Of course, that the structure began life as the headquarters for the Women's Century Club explains much of its incongruity. It also serves as an explanation for why the theater is so haunted. Members of the Women's Century Club were some of Seattle's earliest feminists. They were strong personalities who believed in and worked toward the then radical goal of equality for women. Given this intensity of emotion and purpose, it is no wonder that a few of the suffragettes' spirits have stayed on after their deaths. Jane Wainwright, who managed the theater for nearly 10 years, declared simply that there were always paranormal happenings in the building. After a while, she learned to take the encounters in stride, but the first instance gave her quite a start. As manager, she was required to be at the theater before any of the other staff members arrived. On this particular day, Janet unlocked the well-secured doors and made her way to the glorious main lobby, which retains a 1920s atmosphere and is adorned with a grand piano and a chandelier. The era is furnished with comfortable chairs for the patrons to enjoy while they wait to enter the auditorium. Much to Janet's surprise, a woman with her hair piled up on her head in a bun and wearing a long floral dress was sitting and reading in one of those chairs. Shocked that someone had been able to get in before she'd unlocked the building, the manager steeled her nerves to confront the intruder. Just as she composed herself, Janet realized that the woman at whom she was staring was just slightly see-through. Seconds later, as Janet continued to stare in fascination and horror, the woman slowly vanished. In retrospect, that one incident set the stage, so to speak, for the many encounters to yet transpire. Alice McCullough, who worked at the theater in a number of capacities, remembers being told that on a few occasions, the same apparition of a reading woman would calmly look up from her book and smile in acknowledgement of whichever human being had just come into the theater. Then the ghost would turn off the lamp beside her and walk out of the room. Those comfortable chairs in the lobby were grouped around a large fireplace. Tradition dictates that a fire is always burning in the hearth for moviegoers to enjoy as they wait to watch the show. Lighting the fire was always one of the first jobs Janet accomplished when she got to work. Every now and then, however, she was greeted by the pleasant sight of a fire already burning brightly in the hearth. On those days, she would also find that the chairs in the lobby had been rearranged as if people who were no longer there, or were no longer visible, had been enjoying a chat around the fireplace. Photographers have also taken snapshots of what they thought was a vacant lobby, only to develop their film and find images of people sitting on chairs that had appeared to be unoccupied. On other days, of course, Janet would have to build and light the fire herself. On some of those occasions, she did not have to walk into a darkened lobby, because she would see the spirit of a tall woman leaving the room and flipping the light switch as she went. Janet Wainwright is certainly not the only person to be aware of the ghosts at the Harvard Exit Theater. An employee who was doing paperwork in the second-floor administration area was startled to hear a woman sobbing. Following the sound, he found that the person had overheard a woman who was crying piteously. As he approached her to offer whatever comfort he could, the manifestation vaporized before his eyes. This encounter was bizarre enough in its own right, but it was made even more strange by the fact that the hauntings have usually been restricted to the main lobby and to the third floor. Alan Blangy, who managed the theater after Janet Wainwright's tenure, was a skeptic when he began working there. Even so, he did admit to some puzzling feelings of discomfort, almost an irrational sense that something in the building was hostile toward him. One night, that sense transformed into a specific antagonist. As he and his assistant manager were leaving and locking the building for the night, Blangy heard a loud noise from inside the theater. He quickly unlocked the door and ran back in. No one should have been inside, but Blangy walked into the auditorium. He clearly saw the door to the fire escape closing. The concerned manager ran toward the door, arriving just before it was fully closed. He grabbed the handle and tried to jerk the door open. Much to his surprise, those efforts were met with considerable resistance. It felt as though someone was standing on the other side of the door, tugging at it, trying to counter Blangy's leverage. For several moments, the theater manager and his unseen combatant each pulled on the door until finally, with a concerted effort, Blangy was able to close the door. The assistant manager heard the scuffle and ran back to the building to see what was happening. He reached Blangy's side just as the manager finally overpowered his invisible opponent. The two immediately opened the door wide and hurried through it, hoping to catch the intruder. Much to their surprise, they found themselves staring out at an empty fire escape staircase, 30 feet above the ground. Because less than 5 seconds had elapsed, whomever or whatever had been pulling against the door would certainly not have had time to make a getaway down the stairs. Stranger still, these rickety metal stairs were virtually impossible to walk on without making a terrible racket. Yet neither Alan Blangy nor his assistant had heard any sound at all. Eventually, the two were satisfied that the building was secure. For the second time that night, they locked up and left the theater. Oddly, from that moment on, Blangy never again felt uncomfortable in the building. Quite to the contrary, he now felt welcomed each time he came to work. It was a projectionist who had one of the most frightening experiences. He had arrived at work and was startled to find the movie already playing. He hurried to the projection booth and grabbed the door handle, hoping to catch the prankster in the act. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed because the door was locked from the inside. The projectionist unlocked the door with his key and found the booth empty. Whatever entity had started the movie prematurely is also credited with performing the annoying trick of moving canisters of film around the booth. One of the most common ghost sightings in the Harvard exit takes place on the third floor. People frequently report seeing the apparition of a woman. When they turn to get a better look, the image simply disappears. One of those revenants may be Bertha Landis, who was not only a member of the Century Club, but also Seattle's first woman mayor. When a museum in Seattle's beautiful Smith Tower assembled a display in honor of Landis and her contributions to the city, it was generally accepted that her spirit was to blame for some otherwise inexplicable occurrences, such as supplies being mysteriously moved about the exhibition. Some people even maintained that they had seen Bertha Landis' image floating near the artifacts on display. One more curious note about the female ghosts in this haunting. The Century Club is still an organization whose members meet in the building on East Roy Street where it all began. None of the members, however, will discuss or even entertain the possibility that their procedures have left the old clubhouse haunted. Although most of the ghosts at the Harvard Exit Theater are women, there have been sightings of male images at times. He is slightly translucent, portly, and dressed in old-fashioned attire. This presence may date back to a time before the current building was constructed. Records show that there was a murder in the house that previously stood at the address. The Harvard Exit Theater is more like a regular house than your typical movie house. And this house is definitely haunted. Whoa. In our second story in this first part, Ghost on Guard. The management team at the Moore Theater in downtown Seattle believed that they too have a ghost. Built in 1907, the Moore is the city's oldest surviving theater. The magnificent showplace was bankrolled by James A. Moore, the flashy builder behind much of the early development of downtown Seattle and Capitol Hill. The theater has a simple exterior with Italian and Byzantine terracotta details, but its lavish interior is Gothic in style with mosaic floors and a lobby adorned in solid onyx and marble, carved wood, stained glass, and a ceiling fresco in rose cream gold. For its first 2 decades, the Moore was the Seattle venue for the world-famous Orpheum vaudeville circuit. When the Orpheum organization built its own theater nearby in 1927, the Moore's vaudeville days were over. During the 1930s, Cecilia Schultz, one of the founders of the art scene in Seattle, took over the leadership of the Moore and presented many of the best European and American singers, musicians, theatrical troupes, and dancers of the time. First-class performers such as Sarah Bernhardt, Lily Langtry, the Barrymores, Mary Dressler, and Anna Pavlova. In 1974, the Moore was awarded a landmark status and placed on the National Register of Historic Places, but the theater had fallen on hard times financially. Between 1975 and 1980, it was operated as a movie house called the Moore Egyptian. The Moore returned to stage arts when the film impressionaires lost the lease and moved the Egyptian Theater to a different building a few blocks away. After extensive renovations and restorations, the Moore has been returned to its former glory and equipped with a new and larger seats. The grand old theater is once again a popular venue for dramatic arts, concerts, lectures, and other public events. The protective spirit of the Moor seems to heartily endorse the improvements made to the former vaudeville house, although the shock of realizing they were in the presence of a phantom has frightened some members of the theater staff. The ghost has never done anything that could be construed as malicious in any way. The ghost has never been seen, but it has been felt in the form of a foul odor and a sudden, unexplainable blast of cold air. And there you have it, our first two stories from Ghost Stories of Washington, Chapter 4, Stage Fright, Part 1. Hopefully you enjoyed this and look forward to our next part of Chapter 4 in this series. And we'll see you next time. Take care and have a wonderful and blessed night. Bye for now. And watch out for those ghosts if you come to Seattle.